Great. Welcome back to Unsolved Mysteries with Ellen Steverson of Starting Block Career Services, and I am Nancy Siegel of Solutions for the Workplace. Today we're going to do one of two parts of Unsolved Mysteries of Interviewing. Before, we've talked a lot about your resume. The whole purpose of a resume is to get you an interview. So you get contacted for an interview. Now what? Ellen, take it away.
Well, you're absolutely right, Nancy. I mean, the whole point of the resume is to generate an interview, and then when that interview calls, you do not want to be unprepared.
No,
So
I want to wing it.
that, well, it's kind of like going to a play. Do you really think the actors just get up on the stage and wing it the night of? No, they prepare for months beforehand. So really that's what we want to focus on today is, preparing for an interview kind of aligns with while you're doing your resume, you start preparing for these interviews because when you start sending out your resumes, you could generate interviews very quickly. Some might take a while to come around, but I've had people send out a resume at 11 o'clock at night and at 8:30 in the morning get a phone call. Talk about being caught off guard. We do not want that to happen.
Yeah, but isn't that great? And kudos to you and the resume you've written.
Thank you.
So let's start with, I get contacted for an interview. Is it only going to be a phone contact, or could I get a text asking for an interview or an email?
So people are using a variety of ways of contacting clients now, and they are using text, email, phone, even LinkedIn messages. You do have to respond and really keep up with this type of stuff. I did have somebody today miss an email from a company because she just overlooked it because she's so quick at looking at her phone. She actually missed the email, introduction email. Really make sure during this period you are thorough when you're looking at all of your communications.
And I would actually step back one bit from that. Before you send out your first resume, double check your voicemail box. Make sure you have a message with your name. And make sure that you keep up with your messages so your caller doesn't get your voicemail box is full.
Yep.
Or this voicemail box has not been set up yet. These things seem simple, but I want to hear, not only should the voicemail box be cleared and set up, I want to hear your name. Because if I just hear your phone number when I call and want to leave a message, I don't even know that it's you. I've got to go back to the resume, check again, call again, and now I'm annoyed.
Throughout the interviewing process, I always say to my clients, how many missed opportunities did you have to impress somebody? And if you can't record your name, you are missing the opportunity for them to hear, one, the pronunciation of your name. But if you are definitely in a client-facing role, I want to hear a pleasant voice, a smiling voice, not a grumpy voice. You need to think of your voicemail. And I'll even tell you, I Zoomed with somebody that their picture popped up and it was them eating a bag of Doritos. I'd say make sure your pictures as well out there on Zoom, Skype, all these things are professional.
Great. And so if I get something that is a text, how do I even know that's a real thing and not some scam?
So people do have to be very aware that there are scams. And Nancy, you and I have talked about one of my clients that not only was involved in a scam, but it was like 8 or 9 days of interviews and follow-ups and phone calls that it was so real. So you do have to be very mindful. Don't give out any confidential information. Don't fill out an application. Like, really do your due diligence. If I was to get a text, I'd recommend that you follow up with somebody on LinkedIn and just confirm that you've received their text. Just do a little bit more.
Right. And okay, so I'm contacted for an interview. What are some of the first questions I should be asking?
If you're contacted for an interview, typically the first thing I recommend is you listen. Because if they're contacting you, don't ask questions, listen first. And are they asking to set something up in a few days? Or are they actually saying, hey, do you have a minute right now? So you do have to be prepared for both those scenarios. Obviously, I do tell people in today's world, we're all very good at looking at the phone first. And if we don't know the number, we pass because there's so many. However, when you're in the job search, you do have to pick up. And then you have to be mindful. If you pass on those things, you can be passed on. You might not get back to that person. So even if you're in a restaurant or something like that, I recommend you pick up the phone. You answer the phone very professional. And then if they say, hi, so-and-so with such and such a company, say, great, I'm looking forward to speaking with you. Give me 1 minute to walk outside so I can speak with you quietly. Then walk out of the restaurant and quickly. I mean, I took a phone call at 10 o'clock at night and received a job offer once at 10 o'clock at night at a sporting event with cheering and screaming, which is fine. And I still negotiated a higher salary out in the concession stand area. You do have to be mindful of what you're doing and what you're involved in when you're sending out your resumes.
Okay. So I think listening is great. Absolutely. A couple of other things I would recommend is what kind of interview is it? Is it going to be video chat? Is it going to be conference call? Is it going to be in person? So
Mm-hmm.
that would be a question that if the person who's calling you to set it up, assuming it's not immediate, that would be one question. How long is the interview expected to last? So you
Mm-hmm.
can plan. A 15-minute interview is way different than spending half a day with somebody.
Correct, correct. And typically, not all the time though, so you are absolutely right. Be prepared to ask those questions. Typically, if it's a seasoned recruiter or HR person, they're usually going to tell you these things. And then they might even follow up with a written email, but you cannot guarantee it. And the other thing I'd recommend you ask is, who will I be meeting with? And when they say who it is, please ask for the spelling. And maybe even at that time, you might want to say, am I allowed to have their email address to follow up with them afterwards? And they may or may not do that. Most of the time in today's world, they say no. But if you know how to spell the name of the person, you can look them up on LinkedIn and things like that.
And on the federal side of things, it's usually not one person. It's
Mm-hmm.
very common for it to be an interview panel. So
Right.
you want to ask the names of everyone and the spelling. And if they're not willing to give you the email address, you should still be writing down those names so you can look those people up on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times my clients I recommend they do their research. Everything about interviewing is researching. And go to the company website and they'll notice that everybody that is listed, maybe the board of directors or whoever, they all have an email that's like last name, first name, at, and then the company name. So a lot of times you might be able to, if you know the first name and last name, you might be able to figure out how to email them after the interview, not prior, but after the interview, and with a proper thank you email.
Correct. So let's talk about a couple of other things that go into research because I couldn't agree with you more. Even if you are interviewing for a promotion in your office, you
Absolutely.
still should go through these steps because it's one level up and don't think you know everything.
Or don't assume they know everything. Like I get a lot of people that are doing internal interviews and they'll say, well, my boss will know all this about me. Or why do I need an updated resume for an internal position, Ellen? I was just calling to ask you a question about interviewing. And I said, well, what about updating your resume? And they're like, what? They know. But you know what? We forget. We're all busy. If you don't learn to take ownership of what you've done, they're not going to remember it.
Don't assume anything. We
Mm-hmm.
both know what they say about assumptions.
That's right.
So it's really important. So what should we be researching? What do you think we should be researching from a private sector standpoint?
Well, in a private sector, you definitely want to try and I always tell my clients, is it a public company or a private company? Because that working at one or the other makes a difference, and some have different goals. They don't want to work for a big corporation, some want to work for a corporation. So public, private, what's new, like Google, just Google their name, see if there's anything, that an article that comes up. You might find an article that says that they just landed some huge multi-billion-dollar contract, or you might find out that they're filing for bankruptcy. Do your due diligence in researching the company. And I find a lot of times when people call and they're unhappy at work, a lot of times it boils down to they just didn't interview very well and they accepted positions without researching the companies.
Right. So on the federal side of the house, you can research too.
Mhm.
And because of all of the transparency laws and regs, every federal agency has its strategic plan online.
Right.
Every agency has milestones and goals.
Mhm.
These are things that if you are a savvy applicant, you will research and you will weave that information into your interview responses.
Oh, I agree. And I would say, not only research, but memorize. Because I will, when I do my mock interviews with people, I'll say, so tell me, why do you want to work for this company? What about our mission attracted you? And then I get I read the mission. Am I supposed to know the mission by heart? Yeah, you are. You can't talk about it, so it's not enough to research it and just skim it over while you're watching TV at night. Memorize it, be able to talk about it, and things like that.
Right. So on the federal side too, everybody's got a mission. They should
Mm-hmm.
have values
Right?
and a vision. And that's great information for an applicant, because if their mission is something that you really can't get down with,
Mm-hmm.
then you don't want to work there.
Right.
We should be researching their strategic goals. We should be Googling the organization to see what's going on. I would look up the interviewers on LinkedIn, not to stalk them, but
Right.
just to find out what their backgrounds are. Is it similar to yours? Is it different than yours, etc. So that research, I totally agree, is a huge component.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about something else in terms of interview prep. And one of the things I think is so important is to review the job posting that you're being interviewed for.
Absolutely. And one of the things I would start with is please, please copy and paste the job description into a Word document. Because what happens is when people, I write their resumes, and if they don't get coaching or talk to me and they just go away on their merry way, sometimes I get a phone call in total panic mode. Oh my God, I just got an interview, Ellen. Where's the job posting? Did you keep it? I'm like, no, I didn't keep it. Did you
That's your
keep it?
job.
Yeah. Did you keep it? And they're like, well, I sent the link to you, but when I click on it, it went away. Yes, the job postings will vanish if they take them down. So every single job posting you apply for, yes, copy and paste into a Word document. So when you get the phone call, which could be the next day or in 4 weeks, you have the information. And like Nancy says, study that job posting.
Right. And on the federal side, it could be 4 months, not just 4 weeks. And you do not want to be that applicant that says, what was that job again? I can't remember. I applied for so many.
Oh, yeah.
Do not be that person,
Mhm.
because you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And being on top of your game and managing your career, your job search, all critical. So here's what else I like the job posting for, at least on the federal side. On the federal side, the job posting is really a roadmap to exactly what the agency is looking for. And because the federal government believes very strongly in what they call behavior-based interviewing, asking all applicants the same questions in the same order, They also adhere to what's called the Uniform Guidelines for Employees Selection Procedure, which basically says that all instruments that are used to make personnel decisions, and an interview is used to make personnel decisions, have to be valid and job related. So if you've got the job posting in front of you, you can do a pretty darn tootin' good job of figuring out what questions are going to be asked.
Mhm.
And that's critical.
Right. And in the private sector, sadly, some companies don't do that good of a job with their job postings. However, bigger companies like Boeing, Lockheed, automotive industry, they'll do a much better job at writing out their job descriptions. And you want to make sure you're saving these job postings for the conversation during the interview, but also making sure you're using the same terminology, the same type of keywords. When you're speaking during the interview, use the word process improvement, or during my project, I was managing this. The job posting, when they're written well, do kind of outline a conversation that you should be having, because basically a job posting is saying, hey, we need help with this. And you should be coming in going, hey, I can solve those problems and make your life easier.
Before we get into questions and preparing for questions, many job interviews start out with the "tell me about yourself" question, the
Mm-hmm.
dreaded "tell me about yourself." And far too many people do not understand that it is not an opportunity to say, "I was born in South Dakota,
Mm-hmm.
the fifth of 7 children, and I graduated from this high school, and then I went to that college, and then I met my spouse." And then, no, my eyes are rolling back in my head. It's not about your biography.
Mm-hmm. And I just recently prepped a man who, when I went over this elevator pitch with him, he said, I've never just done that, Ellen, but I'm going to listen to you. And he went on the interview the next day and did what we had practiced. And I got a text saying, got an offer. And he said that basically the entire interview changed when he answered the question the way I told him to. That one question sets up the interview for, I'm a professional and I can solve your problems, or I didn't come in here prepared and I think I'm in a conversation with you as a friend. That's when you're rambling on about your past or where you went to high school or anything like that. You are setting yourself up as, I didn't come here prepared. So when you change the conversation by starting with the job posting, see what the top 3 skills are maybe. And then I always say, hi, my name is Ellen Steverson. I have a degree in XYZ. I have an extensive experience in, and then I tell them the top 3 things off that job posting. I don't care that you're proudest of something totally different. Now is not the time to bring it up. You're answering the question from the job posting of what you can bring help with or how you can help. So pick out the top 3 things on the job posting, and say that during the interview. And then quickly wrap it up with, I'm excited to be here today to discuss this role.
Right. So I think about the "tell me about yourself" as an inverted pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
The first part is to grab their attention.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm an experienced human resources leader with 20 plus years hiring talent
Right.
from all industries. Okay. Second part is to tell them something to get to the points of the job. And the third piece, that pinnacle of, or the bottom of that pyramid, the narrowest part, is to tell them, wrap it up and tell them exactly what you said, is I'm happy to be here and share with you how I can help ABC organization do X, Y, and Z.
Right. If you don't practice and memorize a closing statement, the brain will be so nervous you will babble. So you want to practice, and you are right. The elevator pitch I gave was for a new college grad because I've been working with them all week. So they start with their college degree. But
Right.
if you have experience, you don't even have to bring it up if you don't want to. But the closing statement is so important, and when people practice that question goes so much better. And it's so simple. Happy to be here today to discuss this project management job because my experience really aligns with the job posting. So let's dive in and let's talk about how I can help you. Simple as that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that elevator pitch, how long do you think it should be?
Technically, the reason we call it an elevator pitch is it's supposed to be you get in an elevator, can you tell somebody kind of what you do in 30 seconds? So it really is short. I see a lot of people out there preaching, make it so exciting. But at the end of the day, it's a competitive market. And if you want to say silly things about yourself, hoping they'll remember, you've missed the opportunity to tell them how you're qualified.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not into that whole make yourself unique, that I'm a basket weaver or have gone to every continent. This
Mm-hmm.
is about the job
Mm-hmm.
and job related skills. And when you start bringing up hobbies, family, etc., you are heading into territory which presents an opportunity for the hiring manager to discriminate against you.
Mm-hmm.
You start
Or
talking about your children, there's certain things going on in people's heads.
Mhm. Or, I say to my people, if you are a business person, you should understand EEO laws. Even if you're not in HR, you should understand that there are equal employment opportunity laws that are involved in the hiring process. So then when you start discussing family and things like that, you're making the interviewer uncomfortable. So now they're thinking, where's this going? And everything like that. So again, be respectful as well as come across as very knowledgeable as a business person in general and stay away from those things.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about tell me about yourself. What should I be bringing anything with me to the interview, like references?
So I like to advise people to bring a portfolio. Typically, depending on the level of the job, you typically don't need to have references. However, if you bring a portfolio, you should have a couple of copies of your resume in there. And then you could have a copy of references just in case, but they're not attached to the resume. They're not part of the resume. Your resume, if it's 2 pages, is paper clipped together. And when you walk in, you hand it to them. This way it shows that you came prepared. And if your portfolio has a pad in it, you don't take notes during the interview. Remember, you're not a secretary there to take notes, so pay attention. The pad is more if you have a question at the end and you want to make a note of what time do you want me to show up for the second interview? What building do I go to? Then you can make those notes.
So I actually disagree on, and we're going to talk about being in the interview at our next session. When I was asking you to think about is there any, I've had the same references for 20 years. Should we do something about touching base with our references as part of our interview prep?
Absolutely. I mean, I tell all of my clients that if you have a reference, you need to check in with your reference. You need to make sure they know that the type of job you're going for. And lastly, they should have a copy of your resume. Like you want to coach them to understand, here's the job that I'm going for. I was hoping you could discuss that XYZ project that you and I worked on that is relevant to this position. So you do kind of want to coach them, so they're not saying, I love Bob Smith. He's great. He's so much fun to work with. You want them to give good information. And you might have to remind them, especially if you're talking references that old.
Exactly, and make sure you have their updated contact information.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about preparing answers. Everyone's nervous about what are they going to ask me.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that you can pretty well, at least on the federal side, figure out exactly what the questions are going to be about. On the federal side of things, you need to be able to address what's called the specialized experience requirements. You need to be able to address the questions that are part of the posting. And I believe that if you review that job posting carefully, you will see the main areas that are going to be covered. And so to me, preparing for an interview, reviewing that job posting, writing down on a piece of paper or electronically if that's your thing, the main parts of the job. It kind of goes back to the conversation we were having. And then really think about how are you going to demonstrate to the interviewers that you have what they're looking for. It's not enough to say, oh yeah, I do that. Oh, I done that too. Oh, I'm really good at that. I know I could do it. You have to back up interview answers with specific examples of when you did that thing. And so if you can identify those key words, oral communication, customer service, software design, you need to take those key concepts and identify specific examples over the course of your career when you have engaged in software design, when you've done customer service specifically. And to me, the best way to do that is to be prepared with what I call a CCAR story: context, challenge, action, result. There are, of course, other frameworks to answer interview questions. The government likes CCAR. I know a lot of private industry like STAR. There's also PAR, problem, action, result. STAR is situation, task, action, result. CCAR is context, challenge, action, result. So there's clearly a theme here in all of these. You've got to tell what job it was in, what the challenges or difficulties of that particular assignment were, the actions that you took to solve the problem, and the results that you achieved.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that if you have your CCAR stories prepared, you should also be able to identify, well, if they don't ask me for customer service, how else can I use that story? Maybe I can use that same story for problem solving. Maybe I can use that same story for oral communication. Maybe I can use that same story for working with a difficult person. So if you've got that nailed down in your head, that to me is some of the strongest prep you can do. How do you feel about that, Ellen?
Oh, I agree, absolutely. So I teach my clients CAR, challenge, action, result. And we usually go over about 75 questions. And believe it or not, about 75 questions will generate about 10 to 15 solid answers. So again, like you're saying, Nancy, a question about tell me about your leadership style could also be tell me about the time you had to turn around a situation. So you don't have to feel overwhelmed. I need 75 different stories because nobody can go in prepared like that.
No.
But you want to have, 15 really good stories that can overlap into other things. And then I use the visual of a baseball field. The pitcher is sending you a question. Tell me about a time when, because even in the private sector they use behavioral questions. You then smack the ball and you have to run the bases. First base is going to be your context, where you were doing something, what was your title. Second base is going to be those actions. I did X, Y, Z. And then the result is third base. And just like in real baseball, third base is really a significant base to be on. So you give them good results, and then you have the right to stay at the third because the next runner will bring you home. Or occasionally, just like in baseball, you can hit a home run by linking the question to the job post. Say we're talking about customer service. So on third base, after I tell them the results of my good customer service skills, I might say, So tell me, what are the top skills you'd like to see me implement or use while I'm in this customer service role? Or how do you judge your customer service reps on what skill sets or something? But by asking a really relevant question to the job, you've now slid into home base and it's more conversational.
So that's a difference, I think, with federal versus private,
Mhm.
because government interviews are typically so structured. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, but not when you're answering.
Right. You're absolutely right. And again, depending on who the interviewer is, who's giving you the interview, they might be a more conversational person. Or if you notice they're nervous and they're struggling, because you can't assume that everybody doing the interview is a great interviewer either. If you notice they're nervous, then you might want to just hold your questions till the end.
Right. So preparing, so if you make them do 15 stories, you're a much harder taskmaster than I am.
Mhm.
When I do interview prep with folks, I try to get them to come up with 8 to 10 stories.
Okay. Well, there you go.
um, and nail down what they can be used for. So if we have a moment, I want to give an example of what a CCAR response might sound like
Hmm.
to help our audience. So if the question is something along the lines of, give us an example of when you had to deal with a difficult customer, I would generally start out with what I call a tee-up sentence. Well, I deal with customers all the time. I deal with them one-on-one, I deal with them over the phone, and I deal with them over email. Most of my customer interactions are positive, but occasionally I get the cranky customer. Okay, that's the tee-up. One example that I can share about how I deal with difficult customers was from my current job. And in my current job, I am often called upon to give presentations to the public. There's my context. I was giving a presentation to the public about a new right of way that my organization was proposing to build. And before we could move forward with it, we needed to give the community an opportunity to weigh in. So I scheduled this meeting for 7:30 in the evening. And I started on time. I introduced myself. And before I got too far, somebody in the audience stood up and started screaming at me. You're from the government. You never help any of us. And then went on this rant. So this is my challenge. I knew that if I just let this continue, I would lose control of this meeting, and the 50 other people, community members who had come, wouldn't get their opportunity. So, and here come my actions. I waited for him to take a breath. And as soon as he took a breath, I very respectfully said, Sir, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. I want to make sure we have the opportunity for everyone to share their views on this project. You know, the structure of this program is I'm going to introduce this project for about 20 minutes. And after that, I will open it up to the floor, and everyone who wants will have 5 minutes to speak. And if you need more than 5 minutes, I am perfectly fine with that. Please know that I will stay as late as you need me to listen to your comments about this. And as a reminder to everyone, not only am I here to take oral comments, but I will also accept written comments. And I took that opportunity to put my email address on the whiteboard behind me. As soon as I said that and I was respectful, I could see other people in the audience starting to pull at the guy to get him to sit down. And I waited a minute. I didn't want him to lose face. in front of all of his neighbors. But he sat down. I said, and again, as a reminder, everyone's going to get an opportunity. If you need more than 5 minutes, I will stay as late as needed to hear everybody out. So that really turned the tide. I was able to make my presentation. I took 20 questions from everybody in the audience. And before I concluded, I reminded everybody that I was willing to stay as long as anybody wanted if they didn't feel that they had enough time to speak. And I reminded everybody of my email address, saying that we would take written comments for the next 30 days. At the end of my presentation, not only did audience members clap, but I had about a half dozen people stay afterwards. Here come the results. And 4 of the folks who stayed afterwards thanked me privately for how well I handled the participant who started screaming in the beginning, and they said, he always does that. And you're the first one we saw that handled him without making it worse.
That is good. That's long. I would
Yes.
say in the private sector, I don't know if people would enjoy such a long story, but being in the government, maybe in the government they allow that, but that was almost a 5 minute conversation on one question. So I think you do have to be mindful of that in depending on it's a in-person or phone interview or anything like that. But that's a great story, and it definitely shows all the different actions, results, and all that, Nancy.
Yeah. And so the government does like it long. No big surprise.
Right.
But one other thing before we go today that I think we need to discuss in terms of prep, and that's having questions for the interviewers.
Absolutely.
Can I ask how much money I'm going to make or what training I'm going to get?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. People always feel like they have to ask a ton of questions in the beginning. In the beginning, you're trying, especially if you're on a phone interview, the only goal you're trying to do is get an in-person interview or the next interview. Don't go in thinking this is the interview for the entire job. Take steps and have interview questions at the end that prepare you for the next step and lead towards what you're trying to get. Just be mindful. You don't have to, but never ask about salary, never ask about benefits, never ask about training. If they're hiring somebody that they think is the expert, why are you asking about training on the first interview? Those are definite points.
Right. So on the government side, it is not at all uncommon for there only to be one interview. So I think everybody should go in with 5 or 6 questions. Some of them may be answered. So you should have, you may be able to ask 3, and I think that's plenty. And those questions should not be about you. The questions should show your interest in the organization.
Absolutely. Right.
One example I love to ask is, what do you expect the person who is hired to accomplish in their first 90 days,
Mhm.
in their first year? That's one of the questions I like. Do you have a favorite?
Actually, that's kind of funny because that is my question. What I think most people fail to do is prepare a response. So that question to me is, what would you like to see me do in the first 6 months to a year when I start? And then they tell you what they want, and then you should reply back, great, this is how I can make it happen, or this is how I will make, or how I'll reach that goal for you. I call that my closing question though, because then after you tell them how you'll make it happen, you need to say, I'm very interested in this position. What is the next step? So yeah, so that is my all-time favorite, but in a private sector, I prep them on a response back.
Mhm. Some other questions, just 1 or 2 that I like, certainly the next steps. We're on the same page there. And what did the person who had this job before do that you want to see continued?
Mm-hmm.
And what would you prefer to see different?
If it is an existing position,
Yep.
What would you like to see included now that there's an opening here that I can expand on the position by doing what? And then let them tell you. But again, when they tell you, you should reassure them that you can do it.
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about preparing for the interview.
Mm-hmm.
There's much more to talk about when you actually show up or
Right.
the camera turns on. So that is going to be the next podcast. Thank you, Ellen Steverson, Starting Block Career Services. I am Nancy Siegel, Solutions for the Workplace. Please look for us on LinkedIn, Google us. We would be happy to connect. And thank you so much for listening to us today.
That's right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please visit Nancy or Ellen's website. Nancy's website is www.solutions-workplace.com, or Ellen's website is www.getyouemployed.com for additional information about our services, a free tip sheet which highlights our discussion today, and be sure to tune in to our next podcast, which will be posted soon. Thank you.